Let's get started on what is popularly known as SWOT analysis, and that stands for strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Tonight, we're using the SWOT matrix at assessing Nigeria's past with a view to building a better and enduring economic future. Joining me for this four-part exercise is Professor Franklin Ngwu, Director of Sustainability Center at the Lagos Business School. A good evening to you, sir, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Boason.
Let's start with the S for strength in SWOT. What are the country's strengths over the past decades?
I think that before we talk about strengths, or before we talk about SWOT, which are strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, that is very important. You're supposed to have an objective, a goal, or where you're going to. So it now helps you to now, so when you are now preparing a SWOT, you are now looking at the goal or objective you want to achieve to now use it to now really understand your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. So the first thing we are supposed to ask, first of all, is what is really our goal as a country in Nigeria? What are we trying to achieve? Where are we going? So when you now understand that, that will now help you to now start saying, okay, what is our strength? What is our weakness? What are our opportunities? And what are our threats?
You're sounding, it looks like you're reading a page from the Vision 2010 economic document. The forward to that identifies some of the questions you asked. Where are we coming from? Where are we? Where are we going? And very importantly, how do we get there? So when we talk about the levels of social analysis, talk to me about these four layers as a country and where we are today and the road we've traveled.
So you find out that the four levels of social analysis, which the first one is what we call the social embeddedness. The second level is what we call institutional environment. The third one is what we call the governance level. And the last one, which is what everybody does, is what we call resource allocation. The social embeddedness, as you can see on the screen, it takes about 100 to 1,000 years to develop. That is who we are as a country. That is who we are as a Ijaw person, Yoruba person, Igbo person, Hausa person. So we have over 250 ethnic groups. That is who we are. Our norms and values, our cultures, and the rest of them. But when you now come to the second level, which is the industrial environment, that is where you now have the formal legal system that we use in Nigeria, which takes about 10 to 100 years to develop. I mean, of course, you know where our formal legal system is coming from, which, of course, we borrowed or we adopted. Then we use it to now do the governance, which takes about 1 to 10 years or 1 to 4 years, as the case may be. You seek another election, you now win. But when you now take over the governance, you now allocate the resources the way it's supposed to be and the way you deem fit. So if we look at this is actually the core or the main problem we have in Nigeria. So if I will expand a little bit, you find out that at the end of the day, the norms and values of people is what you can call the informal legal system. When this informal legal system are documented, they become the formal legal system of that country. And to make a legal system to be effective, it depends on the level of which is understood, accepted, internalized to allow compliance. But what has happened in Nigeria is that there is a kind of conflict between our social embeddedness and our social environment. And of course, you know, if you look at the line in that slide, you find out that what you do in resource allocation is influenced by the governance level. What you do at the governance level is influenced by the social environment. And what you do as the social environment is influenced by the social embeddedness. So there is a conflict. And because there is no proper integration at the social level, embeddedness level, you find out that people that's why we have the Afenifere, the Ohanese, the Arewa Constitutive Forum. So everybody's fighting to see how they can control the social environment, through which they can now control the governance level, through which they can control the resource allocation. So that's the core of Nigeria. So if we now use this to now start saying, what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? What are our threats? You might not say, okay, some of our strengths include our population, our size, in terms of the land mass, the population. We have about 200 million people, particularly the youth population. You can also talk about the resources that we have in terms of human and natural resources. Then we can.
Yes, just a quick one there. From the levels of the social analysis that we just showed, that it looks like it's all modeled up right now. I'm trying to figure out where we are in the scheme of things, really, 61 years after independence. Where are we? Can we point it out anywhere, or we're just somewhere hanging in?
Exactly. So the reason why we are still, why you can say that the country is more or less, we have a VUCA environment. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. The reason is because you find out that the social embeddedness is very strong. You can see it takes 100 to 1,000 years to develop. So he's still fighting the social environment. However, what we've done as a country is that we've tried to abandon social embeddedness in terms of our formal legal system. So what is going on is that there is a conflict between social embeddedness that we have and the social environment, and there's no movement. So everybody is now trying to compete for power to see how they can control the center, to see what they can achieve with it.
And fighting over resource allocation.
Exactly, because once you control the governance level, you control the resource allocation.
And then the social embeddedness now begin to haunt you.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, if you put the screen again, I can explain a bit further. You find out that when it was time to select, for APC to select presidential candidates, PNB was selected not because of that is most the intelligent or the most competent or the most everything. So he was selected because of our social embeddedness. When it was time to select the VP candidate as well, it was also the same social embeddedness. And the same thing happened with PDP. So at the end of the day, when the election now proper took place, Nigerians voted in line with that social embeddedness. So when you now take over governance, of course, that social embeddedness will also affect the resource allocation that you are trying to.
Technically speaking, this is a major weakness in us over the last several decades, not just with the current administration, you'll agree, in terms of how we choose those who are in a position of governance. But from all indications, it looks like every part of the country has got some strengths. And you're talking about a few things earlier. Let's return to that, because I want to find out how we can turn these strengths that we've had to build a new and a better socio-economic future.
Exactly. So what we are supposed to do first is to say this is who we are as a people, using this left social analysis and saying, then what are the kind of strengths required or that we have that we can now use to achieve what we want to achieve. So as I mentioned earlier on, the key strength that we're supposed to be looking at is what kind of structure of governance can function in this kind of environment that we have, where you have social embeddedness, where you have the social environment and all that. But outside that, I will come to it shortly. You find out the other strength you have, as I mentioned before, is the population. You have the youth population, you have the resources, human and natural resources, you have the landmass, you have other strengths that you can talk about. Then when you talk about the weaknesses, you now find out that when you look at the social embeddedness that we have and the social environment we have, the structure of governance that we are using to govern the country is not suitable or amenable to that kind of environment that we have. So it means that the structure of governance that we have is a weakness to the country. Then, of course, we know we have that now brings about the issue of tribalism, the issue of the nature of governments we have, the kind of institutions we have, the kind of agents of government that we have, in terms of enforcement mechanism and all that.
So in a manner of speaking, 500 odd ethnic groups and languages put together, instead of being a source of strength, had become more of a weakness to Nigeria since independence. Is that a major factor for the kind of economic mismanagement, corrupt practices, and everything else that have been the bane of the glorious country that we ought to have had?
Exactly. But the reason is because, economic outcomes are determined by policies. And policies are determined by the politics of the government. The politics are determined by the sociology of the society. So you find out that when you take it in that kind of sequential order, you understand that the sociology of Nigeria determines everything about the country. And that is why the 500 or something ethnic groups, everybody is more or less fighting because there's no proper integration of the country to now have what we call cooperative competition, while everybody is now fighting for competition for power. So we don't have competition for development. What we really have is more or less competition for power. So until we develop a governance structure that is suitable and amenable to this kind of plural society that we have, you find out that it is difficult to achieve progress in Nigeria.
Competition for political power, because that is where the resource allocation really lies.
Exactly.
Not with the people who ought to be the economic drivers.
Exactly. Because the competition for power is more or less to control the resources. The reason being that there is no social capital or social trust that will sustain these different ethnic groups, because we don't have the appropriate structure of governance that will accommodate this kind of system that we have, that we're supposed to use to govern the country. Rather, what we have which is, as you will agree, is not really working. It's a kind of centralized system of governance. And at the end of the day, the governors now shy away in terms of their responsibility because everybody's looking at PMB. What is federal government doing? What is this one doing? But nobody is asking the question that the poverty rate in Sokoto State is over 80%. The poverty rate in Yobe State is about 70%. The poverty rate in Ngwu is about 60-something%. So people are not questioning everything. Everybody believes that the federal government is supposed to do anything because of the kind of structure of governance that we have. But if we have a structure of governance that now understands the kind of sociology that we have, and now introduce that kind of system that will allow the different components of the country to really have a reasonable responsibility and power to do so many things, it means that we can make progress.
We're going to go back to these levels of social analysis which you've just given us, because I'm finding it very difficult to understand that in the middle of this, we've tried to have some institutional environment, and it hasn't seemed to have worked.
It can't work. What I'm trying to say is that if you look at the end of the day, if I want to do a contract with you, what will determine that contract is the legal system that we have. But the problem that we have is that a legal system functions better when it is amenable to the norms and values of the society. But what is going on in Nigeria, that the internal environment that we have, it cannot be traced to any norms and values in Nigeria. It's not the Hausa one, it's not the Fulani one, it's not the Yoruba one, it's not the Igbo one. So it's more or less something that is alien to the norms and values that we have in Nigeria. A typical example, if you want to buy a land in Nigeria, you have to buy from the norms and from the social embeddedness, from the Omoliles or from the villagers. When you finish and document everything, they will tell you to go to the government to do now certificate CFO. That CFO now goes to the internal environment. So you find out there is always a conflict between internal embeddedness and internal environment. And unless it is resolved through maybe rethinking the legal system, the governance system, to make it to be amenable to social embeddedness, which do not determine the institutional environment, which do not determine the governance and social allocation, it's a bit difficult to achieve progress.
This is not looking like a very happy, fine conversation we're having tonight, because we're digging into some of these issues right now. But let's return after the break. We will talk more about the level of weaknesses that we have since independence and what this really means for the country's future. This is Arise Exchange. Welcome back to this special edition of Arise Exchange as we delve into a SWOT analysis of Nigeria's economy since independence. And sitting through the entire programming with me tonight on this is Professor Franklin Ngwu of the Lagos Business School. Prof, let's move forward and talk about some of the major and identifiable weaknesses of Nigeria's incorporated over the last 61 years. So when you incorporate it in the business or the corporate world, the whole idea is about the structure of the board, the management, the executive management, and you got the staff. So everybody knows where he or she belongs. But from what you showed us earlier about the levels of social analysis, if we go back to this as, because we're in the SWOT, we're now getting to weaknesses that have been the bane, the pullback in which we can't build infrastructure, we don't have good education or schools or hospitals, potable water, electricity. And it seems like each time we try to build, it looks like what that British journalist puts in his book, This House Has Fallen. It says Nigeria is a perpetual work in progress. But the thing is that no one is sure whether they are destroying what they've built or they are building a new one. So, talk to me.
If you look at the level of analysis, you find out that the main challenge that we have, as I earlier mentioned, is that the structure that we have is not suitable to what we are as a people. So, and of course, you know, when you have a wrong structure in an environment, there is nothing you will build that will stand. Because, of course, you know, the structure is more or less the foundation upon which every other thing will depend. And as I said, the economic outcomes depend on the economic policies. And economic policies depend on the politics, and the politics depends on the sociology, and sociology depends on so what do you mean by social embeddedness? So you find out that weakness that we have now hurts every other thing. So what we are supposed to rethink is how do we develop that structure that will be suitable to our own system. So you find...
Give me an example.
An example of what I'm saying is that if you find out now, at the end of the day, there is a crisis in Nigeria. Even though that crisis is supposed to be handled by the formal government structure, Before you know it, they will call the traditional rulers. Before you know it, they will call the community level. Before you know it, so you find out that even the social embeddedness will be called upon to help to resolve the crisis. If somebody is running for an election, for example, the first place of call that he goes, or even if the president visits, the first place that will go is either the Oba's place, or the Obi's place, or the MES place, and rest of, which tells you the power of the social embeddedness.
What called the royal fathers.
Exactly, the royal fathers. But of course, you're under the Constitution. It's clear. It's difficult to understand the way they still influence what we have in Nigeria.
Influence governance.
Influence governance, exactly.
From social embeddedness into social governance, into governance, and then into resource allocation, because there have been cases in which allocations from the taxpayers' money are given to this social embeddedness structure that is opaque, constitutionally speaking.
Exactly. So you find out at the end of the day, the politicians or the governance leaders, like for example, the governors, the senators, and rest of them, will not want to fight with the traditional rulers because they know that the source of their power is from social embeddedness. So the question then is, who is really in charge? Is it social embeddedness? Is it the police? Is it the governor? Is this who? So you find out that there's a conflict. And people are not really sure who to go to at the end of the day. And of course, when you want to run for an election, what you need to understand first is what is the embeddedness of the country, of the state, of the senatorial zone. And once you're able to play or manipulate or manage the social embeddedness, you are more or less sure to win the election. But when you now win the election, you now win under INEC's formal legal system, you not take over the governance. When you not take over the governance, social embeddedness will now come back to you to tell you, oh, we are the people that really helped you to achieve this victory.
So they can decide who is in your cabinet.
Exactly.
How the taxpayers' money is spent. Is allocated.
Exactly.
So in a typical state, you could have technically two state governors. One officially, the other one unofficial. The one is a social one.
Exactly. And not only that, even though the official one has the police, has the former prime of office, the social embeddedness one, which is the traditional ruler, somehow is even more influential than the state governors. And if you fight them, of course, you will not win an election. Of course, we have examples in different parts of the country where the governors fought the state, where the governors fought the traditional rulers. And at the end of it might not happen immediately, but at the end of the day, you find out that the governors become a bit...
We're trying to identify some of these weaknesses in Nigeria Incorporated. I'm asking again, where do we find one of the best practices in which we can actually find the best example of how to define ourselves and separate the social embeddedness with institutional environment and governance that is civil in nature?
It is not really, you have examples in different parts of the world. But what they have done, including both developed and developing economies, they've not really separated Israel embeddedness with the formal governance system.
How do they work together? How do they coexist? And everyone respects his own level of or layer of authority or whatever.
What they have done is to create a good synergy. So let me go back to where we got our formal legal system from, which is the UK. So you find out that once you become a prime minister, the first point of call is to the Queen, which is Israel embeddedness. And what the UK has done is to say, okay, we are also a plural society. So we have the Wales, we have the Irish, we have the Scottish, and we have the English. And that is why you find out that the Wales, they have Cardiff as their headquarters. They have a devolved system of governance. So what they've done is more or less to appreciate their norms and values and use these norms and values to now develop their formal legal system. But what we've done in Nigeria is that we've abandoned our norms and values and believe that we can now develop an alien system that will help us to govern the system. And that cannot work because Israel embeddedness is strong, is who we are, and it has to fight back.
Technically speaking, from military rule to democratic governance, we're yet to really define what suits us.
Exactly. And as I said before, if you look at other developing societies, Brazil, China, India, all of them, they've understood the Israel embeddedness and say, how do we create a synergy between Israel embeddedness and formal governance system? So if we look at Nigeria, what we can do in Nigeria, for example, is to say, this is who we are. We are a plural society. What structure of governance will be suitable that will enable us to now properly identify our strengths, see our opportunities, handle our weaknesses, and address our threats.
What was that? Was that there at independence in 1960?
It was partial. It was there at independence. But of course, at independence in 1960, you have the regional governments. So the regional government was more or less more to the norms and values of the different regions. So you have the Southwest, you have the Southeast, you have the North. And of course, at that time, that's when we had all manner of development. You had the OAU, you had the Bado, you had Insuka, you had the ABU's area, and all that. And the country was more or less growing based on the resources that we had in that country.
When we return after the break, we'll be looking at some of the opportunities we've lost after that for Nigeria in its 61-year history. We'll be right back, everyone. This is Arise Xchange. I am Boason Omofaye here in Lagos with Professor Franklin Ngwu of the Lagos Business School. And joining the conversation for this part is Olu Arike, the country manager at Husk Power Systems in Abuja studios. Gentlemen, good evening and thank you. One precious thing that Nigeria seems to have wasted so much since independence in 1960 is what you call opportunities, both in human and material sense. Let's kick off this for us briefly. Professor Ngwu, can you identify some of the opportunities that the country had I'm starting on were utilized over the past 6 decades plus one?
A very easy one to identify is agriculture. Another important area is energy. Another important area is the youth population that we have. So these are very interesting opportunities which we've not used very well. So if, for instance, now you look at agriculture contributes about 20% to the GDP. But what are we even doing in agriculture? We are still importing almost everything that we are consuming in Nigeria. But what we are supposed to do is to see that agriculture is even better and will give us more revenue than oil if it's properly utilized. But as I said earlier on, the system that we have in Nigeria is not really allowing that agriculture to really flourish to achieve what we want to achieve. In energy as well, of course, we can combine different sources of energy to achieve what you want to achieve, which we've not also been able to do. You have wind, you have solar, you have hydro energy, and all that. All of them are supposed to be properly harnessed, synergized to give us necessary energy that we have to develop the country.
But here we are with the grazing, open grazing, whatever it is. So we're back to what is called the social embeddedness, because it looks like we are back at the beginning, in which we're not really sure who should be in charge of this, who's the final word or authority in terms of how we deal with the clashes between farmers and herders, and how, because both are profitable businesses and they're all ingrained in our social embeddedness. But here we are causing so much mess on our political, social, and religious economic scene.
Interesting that you talked about the farmer-herders clashes. So you find out that the herders believe that open grazing is what it's supposed to be, is in line with the social embeddedness. But the farmers also argue that allowing open grazing is against their own social embeddedness. So the question then is, what do we use? And of course, when you're now going to the formal system, formal legal system in Nigeria, formal governance system, people don't really believe in it. So there's a challenge. So the question then is, which one should be used? But when you now devolve powers, when you now allow people to be governed in line with their norms and values, it means that if you are now grazing in certain parts of the country, you will know that you are going against the norms and values of those people. When you are now want to do farming as well, you know that this is within the norms and values of those people. So what we are supposed to say is that in certain areas, if you want to allow open grazing, it is fine, but has to be done within an environment that is suitable to the norms and values. But of course, given the population that we've seen, we've grown, it means that what is better now is to have ranching in both north and south, in both everywhere, so that both the herders and the farmers can also accommodate themselves.
You talked about energy earlier, and that's what I'm going to be asking Olu now. Olu, thanks for joining us from Husk Power. You folks have been trying to do a lot of things around the rural energy in Nigeria. So my point is, what is on the table right now? Join the conversation on this particular Independence Day.
Firstly, happy independence to Nigerians. And for us, what is on the table right now is that Husk Power, an Indian-based company, is now in Nigeria to also try and replicate what we've done across India in terms of rural electrification. across India were able to, build mini grids, and we hope we believe that mini grids is a way to help in achieving sustainable development. I hear you talk about agriculture. One of our goals at Horsepower is to essentially power rural communities and help support agro-processing and agricultural activities. For us, the plan is to probably scale to up to 5,000 mini grids across Asia and Africa by 2030, and being backed by major investors like Shell, FMO, NG. We think Nigeria has similar demography and characteristics as India, and it is the same. It is where we are now to kind of replicate what we've done across India by achieving our scale. And in working with agencies like the Rural Rectification Agency, the Ministry of Power, and the Ministry of Environment, amongst others, the goal here is to ensure that people across rural Nigeria who have never had reliable power and do not have access to the grid as we speak can begin to see that reliable power is something that can happen in their lifetimes and can also support their lifestyles and help them in growing their businesses, be it agriculture, be it processing, or even be in trading. So essentially, the outlook is bright, and agencies like the Rural Electrification Agency, like I mentioned earlier, are playing a big part to support companies like ourselves to ensure that power is equitably distributed across Nigeria.
So when I asked what's on the table about the funding, the timeline, delivery, you signed a deal with Nasarawa State. Where is this going to get started? How and when will we be able to say, let there be light, and bring in power to the people?
Right, so thank you for that. We've signed agreements with the Rural Electrification Agency through the NEP program to electrify 7 rural communities in Nasarawa State. And this process will see us electrifying or connecting over 5,000 connections, and across those maybe about 10 to 20,000 people. In terms of timelines, in India we do 2 to 3 mini grids every week. We're able to do that because we understand and have implemented cost reduction strategies. In similar manner, we think that can be possible in Nigeria, and like I mentioned, with support from agencies like the REA, I think we think it is a possibility. In terms of timeline, we currently do about 3 mini grids every 35 days, and like I mentioned, in India, it's a bit different because although similar demography and similar characteristics, but there are quite a few things that still need to be put in place for us to achieve that.
Dr. Franklin Ngwu, let me ask you, I'm sure you remember very well, we tried MAMSA at some point, which was the movement for the social, rural, emancipation, whatever it was, back then during the military. Part of that was the rural electrification, and we all thought it's going to be sustainable. But we've not been able to really achieve that to date. Now we have folks like Olu and the rest of his team at Horsepower and the Indians coming in here to help. Do you think this new model of what we're trying now will be able to achieve let there be light?
I think with technology and other development, I think that what Olu is trying to do with his team will likely work in Nigeria, in the sense that they are more or less going to use other models or other approaches that we didn't really use during the electrification time. So I believe that when they now bring a combination of the different sources of energy, I think a better outcome will be achieved.
Okay, so, but what are some of the key challenges that Nigeria must resolve, Olu, in terms of achieving power sustainability? You talk about Nigeria and India. Yes, both are developing countries, but again, there are different nuances on the ground. And Franklin has been talking about social embeddedness, the issues you face at the social level. If you're clearing grounds and you want to lay solar panels in a particular that takes hectares of land, and suddenly you find the local communities and the Obas, the Kabiesi, whatever it is, or the youth coming through and say, look, you can't do it because this land belongs to us. So you go back to the governor and you come back again to the people. It's all messed up, kind of. It's a conundrum.
Yes, yeah, essentially yes. We've had similar experiences, and obviously it's a nascent industry. If we look at how old essentially the mini-grid sector is, if you look at, I think it's just 5 years, counting from when the NERC instituted the mini-grid regulations. And the challenges really are there. You know, so some of them would be the need that we still need to collaborate with people like the discos in bringing things like interconnected mini-grids, whereby we use disco property that is already existent to also transmit power to existing customers who are maybe underserved or even not served at the moment. There's also the issue of logistics and moving things across from place to place. I mean, we all know the issues at the port, and if it's a possibility, we could continue to streamline the processes at the ports, because there's little or no manufacturing for the components that we use in terms of power generation here, and we still have to import those. So if we streamline these processes, then maybe we can then start to look at similar timelines like we do in India. The other part would be around local financing. There is really no local financing as much, and then there's a currency risk for most of us, companies like ourselves who are local operators, because once you take funding in foreign currency and then your receivables are in Naira, there's a challenge with the swings, with the currency swings. So if some of these challenges can be essentially looked into, I believe there is a clear pathway to scale for people like us.
Professor Ngwu, when we were just doing the SWOT analysis, so we're talking about the alphabet O, which stands for opportunities. So here we were with the Kanji Dam. At the last time, I think we had close to about 40 dams in the country, which were built during the military era with the support of the World Bank. Then I think we had roughly close to 50. If not more than that. Then we got the Mambila Plateau project. We started it, we abandoned it. So between hydro and solar and gas, here we are, that we still fail at 61 to bring light to the people. Our whole energy system is not sustainable on that front. Then you talk about the fossil fuel as well, which ought to help. And I mentioned gas, a bit of that, and petrol, whatever it is. Here we are still winking in the dark at 61 as a country. Try to shed light for me, the way out.
I think the way out is in line with what I've been explaining. For electricity, of course, you know, currently we have generation, we have transmission, and we have distribution. The generation, when you generate, you now move it to the transmission, which now sends to the distribution. I think the best way out is that different parts of Nigeria, in terms of maybe regions, maybe states, should be allowed to maybe control the generation, control the transmission, and control the distribution. So it means that, for example, North Central can say, okay, what kind of sources of energy can we use based on their own comparative advantage? Will it be wind? Will it be solar? Will it be hydro? Will it be any other thing they want to do? So when they generate it, they will transmit it within the North Central. They will distribute it within the North Central. The excess they have, they can now give to other regions of the country. A situation where you generate, you move to transmission, most of the power will be lost in transmission before it gets to distribution, and then it doesn't work. So the only solution will be to allow different components of the country to generate, transmit, and distribute. So that people can now say, okay, in Abakaleke, maybe it will be solar, in Rivers, maybe it will be hydro, or maybe we can combine the sources to achieve what we want to achieve. A situation where things are still centralized through the transmission company of Nigeria, it will not sustain, it will not give us sustainability. Because the
federal government is not going to let go of the transmission company of Nigeria, which is at the heart, at the midstream of the energy sector.
It's not only the transmission, they have to let go so many things. The powers at the center, clearly too much. And that is why so many things are not working in Nigeria, because the country is too big, it's too complex, it's too everything to be governed from the center with regards to so many things. So there is a need also to look at the exclusive list of the federal government and the concurrent list and see the items that need to move from the exclusive list to the concurrent and to the residual list. to enable the country to really develop very, very well.
Okay, Oluwarike, Country Manager at Horsepower Systems, thank you very much for your time on the show, and we wish you all the best. Of course, when we return, Professor Franklin Ngwu, stand by for the final lap of our SWOT analysis of Nigeria at 61. 61 years after independence, Nigeria is today threatened by a myriad of issues led by insecurity of lives and a long list of economic problems, and of course, a volatile socio-political environment. Professor Franklin Ngwu of the Lagos Business School, walk me through this long list of internalized and increasing threats that Nigeria faces at 61. How long do you think the country can withstand these threats if they remain unresolved?
Of course, you know that, as you said, the list is becoming almost endless, from insecurity, unemployment, corruption, and so many other ones. I was just talking to, I bought something in the supermarket this afternoon, and as I was about to go, I asked the young man, he looked at me and said, oh, that he's about traveling, that maybe the next time I come to this shop, I will not see. I said, where are you going? He said, he's traveling out of the country. And there were 4 of them in that shop. And I said, 4 of you going. I said, all of us are planning to leave the country. So it means that the youths are voting with their feet. It means that they are asking if these threats are not properly managed, it will be difficult to sustain. But the main source of the threats that we have in Nigeria, the major threat that we have in Nigeria, is the structure of governance we have in this country. Unless this structure of governance that now breeds corruption, brings insecurity, breeds unemployment, breeds all kinds of crises that we have in the country.
So insecurity that is on the lips of every Nigerian right now is a function of the structure
of governance that we have in the country. Exactly. But of course, what is really causing insecurity? If the youths are employed, they will not be having time to think about insecurity. So I'm not sure if you know, in so many developed societies, the shopping malls they don't have burglary proofs. So one of the reasons, when I was doing my master's in Cardiff, one of our professors told us that one of the reasons why they did it like that is that they have to be cleaned every day. So that people, by the time they clean it, the people that will clean it, they will work 10 hours every day before they will be able to sustain themselves. When they finish and are going back, they're already very tired, so they can't think of committing crimes. So what we are supposed to do in Nigeria is that we have to rethink how do we use the structure of governance in Nigeria to create employment. But that is not happening. As I said earlier on, how many governors have come out to say, oh, I created 10,000 jobs this year, or I created this year, or I reduced poverty by so rate? You find out that at the end of the day, all the focus that we have about poverty, insecurity, unemployment will always attack the federal government.
So it all goes down to the social embeddedness. And I'm finding this very interesting because the whole social embeddedness is the fact that sometimes it becomes very difficult. Here we are a republic. Right? So, but again, if we're just going to discuss who's going to be in charge, some folks says we should all buy guns or weapons and protect ourselves. Some folks says we should pray to God. Some folks says, well, the traditional rulers should be in charge of their community. So my question, is insecurity in Nigeria, who is in charge 61 years on? So in terms of this, governance, or the institutional whatever, or the social embeddedness at the top level?
So at the end of the day, you talked about insecurity. At the end of the day, who is in charge? Who is supposed to control insecurity? It's supposed to be the police. But you find out you have the IG of police, you have the commissioners of police. But the commissioners of police, do they take instruction from the governor or from the IG of police? It becomes another challenge. So you find out that security it's handled by the federal government, more in a kind of a quasi approach with the state governors. And that's why people have been clamoring for state police. So it also goes back to what I said earlier on, the structure of governance. How do we rethink it to bring about that governance structure that is suitable and amenable to the plurality and the peculiarities that we have in Nigeria? So if we're able to do that, you find out that people can now ask certain governors and say, you've been here for 4 years, you've been here for 6 years, how many jobs have you created? So of course, at the end of the day, they say, oh, everything depends on the federal government. Federal government controls everything. It means that the governors are even shying away from their responsibilities and what they're supposed to do to the society. So I said earlier on, unless we address the structure of governance in Nigeria, the trends that we have in terms of corruption, insecurity, unemployment, poverty rate, it will continue to escalate. Because at the end of the day, you find out that the population growth is a lot higher than the economic growth. It means that there will be more people unemployed, more people will be poor, more people will take to crime, and of course, here we are. So it is a challenge.
Yeah, so in terms of the SWOT analysis, which should help us do strategic planning, decision making, look forward to the future with strategic alternatives. So I'm trying to find, we've traveled 61 years down to this point, this day, this Friday, the 1st of October, 2021. So I'm trying to find a path to the future in terms of assessing both our internal and external factors and our current potentials. That's where I'm trying to find it, building the next 100 years, looking at Nigeria at 100, because clock is ticking, 61, 100 is just around the corner.
I think that if we look at from where we started, we've looked at our strengths and we've looked at our weaknesses, we've seen our opportunities, and we've also identified our threats. So using this SWOT, the question then is, what are we trying to achieve? If we say, okay, we want to move 100 million people out of poverty, the question then is, what structure of governance will help us to achieve that? So if we say that we want to move forward to become truly the giant of Africa that we say that we are, what we are supposed to say is they need to be proper rethinking that structure of governance, particularly, let me emphasize, in terms of the powers that the federal government control. It's very important to make the center to become less attractive so that what we can going to have will be competition for development, not competition for power. If you look at the moment, everybody's talking about 2023, but nobody's telling us about the economic development that we're going to achieve before maybe in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, as the case may be. Even when you hear it, the focus more is in terms of 2023. So in terms of going forward, what I am suggesting or proposing is that there's an urgent need for the federal government, the leaders of the different components of Nigeria to truly agree that this structure that we are using is not working, and it will not work, and is not sustainable. They must rethink it and see how they can move certain powers from the federal government to the states and local government, and possibly, the states can now also come together and form maybe regional government, as the case may be.
Is that the restructuring thing or constitutional review? The current exercise we are taking is in that direction, or we're still moving around in circles?
It is in that, but of course, there hasn't really been that will I say, convincing commitment from the center that this is important. And this has to happen in line with also legal reforms, so that people will also understand the legal system that we are using, so that the legal system will be in line with our norms and values, particularly those areas that are common across different parts of Nigeria.
That takes me to that area which is the most oft talked about, the resource allocation. Do you think we can achieve all of this together without falling apart?
We can actually. There's really no reason to fall apart. The problem that we have in Nigeria is that we are looking at a small cake without looking at how we can bake a bigger cake through a better structure. By the time you rethink the governance structure, you find out that the resources of the country will definitely blossom. So if you look at agriculture, for example, I think I've explained this before. Indonesia made about $12.8 billion from agriculture in 2019. How much did we make? Nigeria has a competitive advantage in certain economic trees, which if we use, you find out that we can even achieve what we want to achieve. If any state plants 10 million economic trees, in 3 years' time, that state will be making about 250 billion naira as IGR. So the issue of VAT, whereby Rivers or Lagos wants to control their VAT, will become less contestable, because every state will be empowered, every state will have the resources in terms of what they will use to achieve what they want to achieve. And of course, poverty will reduce, unemployment will reduce, insecurity will reduce, because people will be employed.
So the whole resource allocation thing goes back to governance issue, and then we all move back the same way all the way through that particular ladder. I think that's a very interesting conversation we've had tonight. We thank you for your time today, Professor Franklin Ngwu, Director of Sustainability Center at the Lagos Business School. Have a great evening and enjoy your holiday weekend.